Good afternoon from Providence, Rhode Island. This is Zachary Stoltz with Chisholm, and Kilpatrick. To my right today, joining me for our conversation is Robert Chisholm of Chisholm, and Kilpatrick. And to my left is Bradley Hennings. And today we're talking about VA, access denied. It's going to be a conversation mostly with Brad and Robert talking about all of the different types of access that advocates need in order to represent their veteran clients and their families, and how there are several problems with this throughout VA. We're not blaming anybody, but there are some very problematic issues that we are confronting with having just basic access to our clients' files. And it's something we believe that veterans advocates, veterans themselves, their families should really know about. And so we're just going to have a discussion about that today. Please feel free to ask some questions as we go along. We're happy to have a good conversation about this. And we're going to start it off with a little history lesson from Robert Chisholm. How has VA stored veterans' files over time?
So in the beginning, when I started representing veterans, and honestly, I really didn't get into this until 1990, but historically, they were paper files, literally paper files. And in those files, you would have service records, you would have medical records, and then you'd have statements, claims. Just about everything was in a paper file. These files could range anywhere from the low side of 500 pages, and we've seen files upwards of 10,000 pages.
What kind of papers were in these files? Was it all nice, crisp, white, clean paper?
Nope. Generally speaking, they were held together with some kind of a fastener, and they were in stacks maybe about this big, maybe a couple hundred pages, held together by a fastener. They were not organized in any fashion, meaning by chronology, or they weren't organized by type. That is, they could have claims, medical records, service records, written statements, photographs, whatever, and it would be kind of haphazard at best.
But surely it was all of that paper file was just a one. They at least had the veteran correct, right?
Sometimes you would see, let's say we're representing John Doe for the sake of this, and Jane Doe's documents were also mixed in with John Doe. So sometimes there were records that were mixed with other veterans. And so you never knew what you were going to get when you got a file, but what I recall mostly is that they would come in these big boxes, especially if you're talking about a 10,000 page record. And you would literally have to go through each document, and we did go through each document to annotate it and make sure that it was relevant to the specific veteran's claim.
And so one of the problems with this is there was a big fire, which burned up a lot of veterans' records in St. Louis. So the idea of storing all of these veterans' lives and their families' lives in paper really kind of turned out to have a catastrophic effect, and VA had to kind of go back and rebuild some of those.
Not only was there a fire that destroyed a lot of service records for many veterans, but there were photographs of some of the VA regional offices where these files were stored, where the floors were literally bending under the weight of thousands and thousands of pages, and really tons of pounds of weight, because these files were so large. The other thing I wanted to point out is that when a file was transferred from a regional office to the Board of Veterans Appeals, before they digitized them, the physical file had to go to that location. And many times files were misplaced, lost, or took a while to be rediscovered. And that caused a lot of delay in the processing of claims. There were other causes for delays, but this was another vestige.
Sounds like a problem that VA should solve. And so they have. They digitized everything, right? And can we walk through that process a little bit? Because VA recognized, to their credit, they recognized that these paper files were a major problem, and so they decided to digitize everything.
Yes, they did. So that process has taken a long time, and it's, I would say, at this point, mostly complete. I don't know exactly how long that process took in order for them to digitize all these files, but it took a number of years to do it. They had been reluctant for years to do it, but the Social Security Administration, anyone who has an SSDI claim, for example, all of those files had been digitized long before VA decided to digitize their files and scan all these files in. That process was done through private contractors, as I understand it. And now what we get when we order or request a file is a CD-ROM, and on the CD-ROM are a bunch of PDFs and other documents with the entire file. So instead of getting a box with 10,000 pages, we get a CD-ROM with the file on it.
All right, so problem solved. Thanks for your time, everybody. Just kidding.
Whoa. We're talking about access denied.
Just kidding. So they've digitized everything, and now there are several different platforms upon which these records sit, and which veterans advocates and veterans have some access to, and the Board of Veterans Appeals has some access to, and the regional office has some access to. The Court of Appeals for Veterans Claims doesn't have access to, but we'll get into that a little bit later. So let's talk about one of the systems upon which VA scan these files into, and which they are now dealing with rather than creating new paper records. They're using something called VBMS. And Brad, can you talk a little bit about that? What does it stand for? What is it? How does it work? What's going on?
Sure. So VBMS stands for Veterans Benefits Management System. And what it is it's the electronic claims file, meaning it's the repository of all the information related to a particular veteran as it relates to his compensation claims in particular. One of the things that they've not done as good a job about scanning everything in are appeals from medical centers, some vocational rehabilitation.
Let's slow down. VA has not done a good job of scanning in medical records. What else?
So this is for appeals from medical centers.
Okay.
Vocational rehabilitation records, as well as certain overpayment and financial records.
So these are vital records that may or may not be getting scanned in properly.
That's correct. Most standard compensation claims do not have those kind of records, but there are many that do. But not all of them got scanned in, as we were talking about before. But most of the stuff has been scanned in as it relates to compensation claims. And this is what the adjudicators at the VA regional offices and at the Board of Veterans Appeals do when they're reviewing a claims file. They look at their computer screen, and it shows file by file all the contents of the veteran's claims file. The problem is that the labels that are often placed on these files are incorrect. So if I'm an adjudicator and I look at something and it says, here is your VA statement of the case, and I click on it and it's actually a rating decision, I've just wasted time clicking on the wrong document. Mm-hmm. And so that's pretty endemic throughout. It's not a very intuitive
So
system.
let's get a little bit more basic than that, because now we're talking about looking at VBMS. How do you even get into, and I think Robert can help us with this a little bit, how do you even access VBMS? You were talking about being an adjudicator at VA. What's a VA adjudicator do? He or she sits down at his or her desk and fires up the computer, and VBMS just comes up and you can click through really fast like it's a PDF. Is that how it works?
No, it's a painful process to actually log into the system. VA has locked down a number of their systems. It's unclear how secure they are, but they've locked them down. An adjudicator will pull up VBMS and type in a veteran's claims file number. And so
okay.
I pull up John Doe. And when I pull that up on my screen, I get a list of all the documents associated with John Doe. And then I have to click on each individual document that's listed to see what's actually in there. Okay. It takes an incredibly long time to go through a large claims file. It is not an efficient process.
So good news, it's not just VA that has access to VBMS. A couple years ago, VA made VBMS access available to advocates. So your veteran service organization advocate, your private attorney, your private representative has access to it. Why, Robert, is this important?
Well, this is important so we no longer know what's happening in the file by getting a copy of the file, because everything is dynamic and it's online, as Brad was saying. So if we want to find out whether John Doe, our hypothetical veteran, has received a rating decision, for example, we have to go online into VBMS, log in, as Brad was describing, and look to see if the decision is there. How do we log in? So we log in through a PIV system. So I brought my PIV card. This is the card that I use, and you put it into this little card reader like this. And if this were connected to my computer, and it isn't, that would start the access point. But to get one of these PIV cards is very difficult. Let me be candid about that. It is a time-consuming process. And it took many, many months for me to get access years ago. And Brad recently obtained access. And Brad used to work at the Board of Veterans Appeals. So,
Brad, what you used to do at the board?
So I was a board member or a veterans law judge deciding these kind of cases at the board.
And it took you how long to get your VBMS access?
15 and a half months.
when you transferred and started working with us here at CCK.
Yeah.
Did it take you 15 and a half months when you were working for the board to get that access?
No, it did not.
Okay.
So there are some problems. So sorry, Robert, please continue.
So there are some hurdles getting access. The first thing to note is that in order to get access to a veteran's file, you have to file a Form 2122A. In order to get a PIV card, you have to be an accredited attorney or an accredited claims agent. Once you are one of those, then you have to go through the process of obtaining a PIV card. And it is a very lengthy process, and it is not an easy process. To say it's frustrating is an understatement. You have to get fingerprinted on a machine that sometimes works, sometimes doesn't work. In Rhode Island, it's been in different locations at different times, and the fingerprints don't always take. Once you go through the fingerprinting process, they have to set up an email account within the VA system, as I understand it, Brad. And if they don't set it up in a certain amount of time, then your fingerprints, quote unquote, expire, and you have to go back and get fingerprinted. If this sounds silly, I don't know the reason for it, but it is absolutely, and we've gone absolutely true, and we've gone through this process multiple times. And then the cards are, these reader cards are only good for about a year or two, and then you have to go back through the entire process again, including getting
But it's important that we do it, because if we don't,
then we do not know what's happening with our clients' files.
Especially at the agency level, at the regional office level, and the Board of Veterans Appeals level, because that is a place where the record is active. We can add evidence.
Yes.
We can rebut some of VA's evidence if it is not favorable. It's vital that an attorney or a representative has access, and this is kind of the only way we get to do it.
It is the only way that we get to see right now what's going on. So if a client called us up and we're in VBMS, we can look up and give them an updated status as to what's happening on the claim.
What it really is doing is it's leveling the playing field. For years, VA was able to operate somewhat in isolation, and we would only find out after the fact what was happening with our clients' files. We'd get mail, that their mailing has been suspect at best over the years, and it would take a long time. Now, we can log in at any point and see exactly what the same thing that VA adjudicators can see.
But I think it's important to point out one thing about VBMS. We don't know at any given time what's happening on a veteran's case. There is no email alert or any notice in the system that something has happened on Jane Doe's claim, John Doe's claim. It's only when we type in the claim number or the veteran's name and look at VBMS and look at every single document to make sure that something or nothing has happened on a particular claim. But there's no alert system, at least for outside representatives, to find out exactly what's happening on a claim unless we log into the individual veteran's case.
I feel like it's important to put a disclaimer in at this point, because we're probably scaring people who are watching about their attorneys or their representatives' access to VBMS. Rest assured that CCK has many attorneys and agents who are accredited and who have these PIV cards. And so we are, in fact, able to keep up with what our clients are going through at the Department of Veterans Affairs. It is far from perfect, but we are doing the very best that we can with the access that VA is able to give us. So can we talk a little bit about that, Brad? Who is able to get the access to these? What's kind of the process that VA makes you go through? They don't just let you walk in, say, I want VBMS access. Oh, okay, here's your PIV card in 15 and a half months. You have to display some level of competency and privacy and all that stuff. So walk us through that a little bit.
Sure. Robert talked a little bit about some of the requirements, but the first step in getting a PIV card and ultimately VBMS access, is to contact your local regional office. This is as an accredited representative. You contact your local VA regional office and their change management agent.
And you're accredited by the Department of Veterans Affairs. You've signed up. You've taken the continuing legal education courses, all of that stuff.
You've done all that. You're an accredited agent. You're an accredited VA attorney. And then you send a message to the change management agent and say, I would like to get a PIV card and get VBMS access. That should then trigger the beginning of the process, which includes a number of forms that you need to fill out and return to the change management agent, and they then initiate what they call an Office of Personnel Management, OPM, background check. And it's incredibly invasive, actually, in terms of the questions that they ask, and it can take months and months and months. Assuming the background check comes back.
So what's interesting about this is you go through a process to become accredited,
Yes.
but that isn't good enough. They don't rely on that. You have to go through another process to get rechecked again,
Right.
more invasively.
Yes. More invasively. You go through that process again. Assuming everything comes back okay, then you have to follow up, go and get your fingerprints taken, physically go and get a card. Once you actually have your PIV card, you have to enter, have a password set up or a PIN code set up for your PIV card. So now you've got your PIV card, which is great, but you still need to get access to the systems that you need. And you have to, again, go through your change management agent at the VA local regional office, go through them, and then probably talk to the VA help desk and your own IT people, and the VA help desk and your own IT people, the change management agent, and voila, you have VBMS access 16 months later.
All right, so now you can look at the regional office, and the Board of Veterans Appeals uses the same stuff, right?
Yes.
Do they use anything else?
They do use other systems besides just VBMS.
So VBMS is only part of the pie.
So the other main system that they have historically used to track appeals is called VACOLS, which is the VA Control. Gosh, I can't even remember the name.
Something locator system.
Locator system. I should know this.
Yes.
But it's the system that they use to track appeals at both the regional office level and at the board level, exactly where the appeal is at, what its location is, what its status is. It has all that kind of information. Again, that's the historic system that VA has used.
So you go through the regional office, VBMS, the Board of Veterans Appeals, VBMS, and VACOLS, and then you go to court. The court does not use any of these systems, right? So at the court, you have to go back to the paper file, and you go back to a static thing at that point, because at the court, you can't supplement the record anymore for most cases, for the large majority of cases. And so the Court of Appeals for Veterans Claims, at least to our knowledge, doesn't really deal with the reality of VBMS and VACOLS and all of these other things. Can you comment a little bit about that, Robert, and kind of the history of that?
All right, so I think it's important to say, first of all, the court only reviews the record as it existed on the date the board made its decision. So that, as you said, is a static document. And historically, that were these large paper files that we would get. And the court also got those. Then the court went online and digitized all its files through its e-filing process in about 2008, 2009. I'm not sure exactly when. But now the court only reviews some of the documents that are specifically listed in the parties' briefs. So they don't have a need to go online and review a client's ongoing record, if you will, but only those records that are relevant to the issues that the parties bring before it. So that's why they review, as you said, a static record.
And Brad, there's a new twist to the world of VBMS, VACOLS, and all that stuff, and it's called Caseflow. Caseflow is a new kind of electronic filing, electronic record system. And can you talk about that a little bit?
So Caseflow is designed to replace the functionality of VACOLS. VACOLS is a very old system. And VA has been trying to, what they call deprecate, which basically means get rid of, this system for a while. And Caseflow has a number of different components to it, but its most important component from our perspective is keeping track of the status of the case going back and forth between the regional office, the Board of Veterans Appeals, and the Court of Appeals for Veterans Claims. It has a number of different functions. One of the functions is called Reader, and that is a shell on top of VBMS, because VBMS is such a difficult system to work with. This helps people work with that. It also has a number of other components to help VA dispatch decisions, keep track of status, and accomplish other things that it needs to accomplish.
And so what about eFolder Express? That's another one. So now we're up to, what are we at? 3. We're up to VACOLS, VBMS, Caseflow, and then there's eFolder Express. Can we touch on that real quick?
Sure. So eFolder Express is a component of Caseflow. Caseflow is the term for a bunch of different systems that VA has been producing that are all integrated. And eFolder Express allows you to get a one-click download from VBMS or a one-click download of the veteran's claims file, electronic claims.
So can I jump in here because
Sure.
I want to say something. Right now, before eFolder Express, what we have to do to get a file is request it from the VA. And as I said, it used to be the paper file. Now it's on a CD-ROM. But just getting that file delivered to us can take 3, 6, 9, 12 months. What Brad's talking about with eFolder Express is really going to change for any representative. If they can push a button and download the file onto their own computer and then review it, that will be a big game changer for everyone who represents veterans.
So you can tell this is important to us as advocates. You can tell that we spend a lot of time, we spend a lot of resources at the firm. We take it very, very seriously, and we make sure that we do have access to this. And as loyal listeners of our Facebook Lives and loyal readers of our website know, and for anybody up to speed on anything happening with VA benefits knows that there was a huge seismic shift in the way claims are adjudicated, and it is ongoing. It is called it's Appeals Modernization Act, the AMA. And when the Appeals Modernization Act happened, there are now several, and please go to our website, cck-law.com, for a lovely video explaining what happens under the Appeals Modernization Act. But in any case, there's lots of lanes now and lots of choices, and veterans have much, much, much more choice and control, as VA likes to say, choice and control over their claims. And so with choice and control comes great responsibility. And the responsibility kind of comes out of being able to follow. The only way to fulfill this responsibility is to be able to follow along with what's happening to these claims. So Robert and Brad, we'll go with Robert first. Can you please touch on why it is so very important that advocates have access to this and don't just rely on getting these paper files anymore?
Well, the process is fluid, to say the least, right now. There are people that are in AMA. There are people that are in the legacy system, what we call the historic appeal system, who have the opportunity to then transfer into the new Appeals Modernization System. And all of that should be documented in VBMS. So let's say we're representing John Doe again. John Doe makes an election after he gets a statement of the case to transfer his file from legacy into the new Appeals Modernization System, and the letter goes in. And we check into VBMS. We'll know within a couple of weeks whether that request has been uploaded into VBMS and whether VA is tracking it appropriately and noting that this isn't another statement of the case, but actually a request to transfer the file from legacy into the AMA system. So it's those kinds of things that are going to be very important. eFolder Express is going to be very important because one of the lanes you can go into is called the supplemental claim lane. If you get a denial either at the regional office or the board or frankly the court, you have 1 year to file new and relevant evidence. And if we can push a button, download the file, look at the file, determine what evidence, like a medical opinion, for example, that we could submit that would be new and relevant evidence, that would be a much faster process than waiting 6 to 9 months, and that 1 year period is running against you, if you will, to get that
because timing is of the essence.
Yep.
So Brad, as a person who once worked Brad has experiences you can read on our website at the Court of Appeals for Veterans Claims and at the Board of Veterans Appeals in Washington. As somebody who worked for the Department of Veterans Affairs and now represents veterans and their families in private practice, can you talk a little bit about your perspective of why it is so vital and important that we have this access?
I think Robert really alluded to a lot of it. It's about the importance of keeping up with the deadlines, particularly under the AMA. The deadlines are very strict. The options are greater in some ways, but it's you have to have sort of active, competent representation. You always have to be aware of what's going on with the case and what you need to do next. Before, everything ran on autopilot. In the legacy appeals system, it was set up that although it took a long time, it didn't require as much of the veteran. Here, the veteran has to make choices at every step of the way, and they have to meet certain timing deadlines. And the only way representatives can effectively do that is to know exactly what's happening with the claim at any given time. And having to wait 3 or 6 or 9 months really puts both the veteran and his representative under the gun to get that done. Whereas with eFolder Express and the ability to download a claims file very rapidly, you eliminate the 3 to 6 to 9 months, and you're able to then develop the case, work with the veteran, get everything done in a timely fashion.
Closing thoughts, Robert Chisholm.
Could we talk before we close a little bit about some litigation that we might be involved in?
Oh, we should talk about a little bit of litigation. There's a case that is named after a guy named Robert Chisholm.
That's me.
It is litigation that there has already been one round that's gone to the Court of Appeals for Veterans Claims, and it has to do with staff and paralegal access. So, Robert, would you like to talk about it?
So we were talking before about how one obtains one of these PIV cards, and we believe that paralegals, and we call them claims advocates in our firm, but paralegals should be able to get a PIV card without first having to become accredited. So we asked VA for permission to do that. VA said no. And then VA said we couldn't appeal that decision. So round one, we filed a writ in the Court of Appeals for Veterans Claims.
It's a petition for a writ of mandamus, which is fancy Latin for saying we want the court to tell you to do something.
And we wanted them to either say, allow us to do this. But what happened is in March 2016 or so, the case was argued and the court decided that we could appeal the decision. So we appealed the decision. And the next thing that happened is the case went up through the legacy system, and the board issued a decision finding that our paralegals could not get access to VBMS without first becoming accredited. But as you pointed out, and I want to make this clear, that we have a number of paralegals who are accredited and have access. This is for the rest of them in our firm.
And it is as a sense of, in our opinion, basic fairness, and the best thing for the veteran, what in our view is the best thing for the veterans community as a whole. So that's why we're fighting this fight.
Right. And so after the board denied it, we filed the appeal in court, and this case is now just starting in the Court of Appeals for Veterans Claims.
Round 2.
This is round 2. So we'll see what the court says about that. But when we're talking about access denied, it's not just access denied, it's access delayed in terms of getting these files over the years. So I think it's a combination of both of those things. And I think it's really important, and I guess this is my answer to your question, it's really important for representatives to have access to their files of their clients so they can see what is happening. I don't know if there were any questions.
No questions?
It doesn't look like there were any questions.
Bradley, your last thoughts.
Just one thing I wanted to point out, and that's talking about paralegal access and the fact that we do have lots of paralegals who then become accredited VA accredited agents.
So they can help our clients?
But there's a huge delay in the accreditation process, and I don't want to get too far into the weeds on this, but a lot of times to get accredited, our folks are waiting a year or two just to become accredited. And then you're talking about another year or so delay to get VBMS access. So you're talking about years of delay where these employees are not able to as effectively help us represent veterans.
All right. So that is the rundown of access to the to veterans records and the importance of that for representatives, be they at VSOs like our friends at DAV, be they at private firms like ours, be they for accredited agents throughout the country. It's something important that veterans and their families and anybody seeking VA benefits should really know about, have knowledge about, have a working knowledge of, make sure that their representatives are staying on top of their cases. We can assure you that we are doing the best we can with all of ours. And so from Brad Hennings, Robert Chisholm, and Zach Stolz, we thank you very much for your time, and we'll see you next time.